Testing. There we go. Lord, we're so thankful for this Sunday. We're thankful for our time of Sunday school and for the lesson that Brother Nathan has prepared for us. Lord, we know that you always take time to speak to us. Help us to have our ears open, not only to hear, but to apply what we've learned today. God, we ask that you would bless Brother Nathan, anoint him today, and any needs that are present today. We know that you are aware of them and you're able to meet them. And we believe today that you can do all things. And we give you glory and praise for this day. Amen.
And today we're still finishing our quarter on Old Testament favorites. Been a couple of quarters worth of this, so this is like the 24th lesson. But this will be our final one in this series. And today we're going to be looking in the book of Daniel. We're going to cover information from pretty much the whole book, but we're not going to read the entire book during the class, but we'll reference some sections during the lesson. And we're going to be looking at probably one of the most well-known Old Testament people. And this lesson's a little different because it's not just a person, it's three persons. We're going to actually be looking at the three Hebrews. And in this study, there's four main principles we're going to look at. I'm going to give you those up front. Just kind of keep these in mind as we go through the lesson. You'll see where we're talking about. But the first principle we're going to see is that God will be faithful even in the midst of extreme circumstances. If you know the story, being thrown into a fiery furnace is pretty extreme. The second one is that faith before the trial enables us to have faith during the trial. And thirdly, that God strengthens the believer to boldly face their hour of need. And last point we're going to look at in the lesson is that we should fellowship with those of like precious faith. all four of these are valid points in this lesson as we look. So as we look at the lives of these three Hebrews, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the first point we want to bring out is actually their names. You'll notice I called them by their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, rather than their Babylonian names. To me, I've always thought this even as a kid. It's kind of weird. Most of the time when we study these three Hebrew boys, we call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I never understood why we're referring to them by those heathen names. Why we're not calling them Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That was their name. The Babylonians changed their names in an attempt to challenge or degrade the name of the God they chose to serve. So again, you don't have to agree with me on that, but I always wondered why we calling them by those heathen names. We need to call them by their real names, their God-given names. So the second point we want to look at is that a lot of people, when they study these three boys, believe that the main lessons only refer to this fiery furnace incident. That's tied to them. When you say when we say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the first thing you think about is the fiery furnace. But there's a lot more to be learned here than just that. I mean, just the fact that they changed their names tells us something about the devil's tactics. He tries to change everything. He's even trying to change the name men and women and trying to make them interchangeable. Names and things mean stuff. The other thing I think we can see just at the onset of the lesson is that faithfulness to God was a priority for these men before the fiery furnace. It didn't become a priority the day they were thrown in a furnace. It was already a priority. It's me, I think it was a priority before the Babylonian captivity ever even started. When they were little kids, I think it was a priority. So it was their faith which brought them to that place, that fiery furnace, all that. But the real test of character came way before they were cast into that fire. Sometimes I don't think we see that same lesson in our life. We've alluded to this in most all these lessons. We all want to be David and slay Goliath. We all want to be the great leader of all time, all this kind of stuff. We all want to have these great victories. But all that starts with just everyday life, living in faith and doing what God told you to do. Stuff that you don't think matters. But I think we're going to be surprised how much those little things we did that we just kind of took for granted actually mattered. People are looking at you. They're looking at what you're doing. They're looking at what you're saying, even little bitty things. So in my mind, to be great in the Lord, basically everybody is. Be obedient, and you will accomplish what God's told you to do, sent you to do. So we're also going to see, lastly, I think that it's vital that we fellowship with those who will encourage us in the Lord and continually challenge us to be the best. You become what you hang out with. Brother Harden used to say, if you run with a skunk, you're going to stink. Who you hang out with is what you become. In my mind, I see this when I first went to college. You know, I lived in the middle of the Bible Belt in South Mississippi. You know, I lived in a dry county. We did not have cable TV even when I was in college in Lafayette. There was no cable in my house. I mean, you know, we were all in the middle of the Bible Belt. Everybody. All of my kids I knew in school, most of them went to the church I went to, for that matter. It was all like that. And when I went to college, that wasn't the same people. I noticed my vocabulary changed considerably when I first went to college because I was hearing all these words that I usually didn't say. And before I knew it, I'm saying those words. And I was like, what am I doing? I don't say words like that. But when I was around those people, that's where it kind of slipped in. I noticed when I came home on the weekend, I didn't use those words. So it's easy to see. You're influenced by what you're around, who you're around, the people you associate with. These three boys point that out too. So again, the lives of these three young men predominantly surround this event, but we can't fail to see the big picture. Clearly, the choices each one of them made before the trial put them in the position for the deliverance that they received, for the miracle. So the victories and the blessing were experienced after the trial should also be credited to their faith before the trial, before they ever even lit the furnace to begin with. So none of us know when we will be called upon to stand for righteousness. So it's necessary for us to grow in faith and then allow that faith to be part of your lifestyle. It's not something you get the moment before the trial. It's something you already had way before the trial. Your life, we got to get your life go now. You can't wait until something happens. Serve the Lord now, today. So when we look at these three Hebrews, we're going to break it into three categories about their deliverance here. And we're going to study each one of these points, and they actually flow together. So the experience of final victory, again, depends upon making right decisions along the way. So the first point we want to look at is before the fire. And it's in Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to read a little bit of it to give us a whole context here. It's Daniel 1, verse 1 to 20. It says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, unto his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spoke unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skilled in all wisdom, and cunning, and knowledge, and understanding, science, and such as ability to stand in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. He gave unto Daniel the name Belshazzar, unto Hananiah of Shadrach, and Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah of Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portions of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel unto favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and drink, for why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine which they should drink, and gave them pulse. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of days that the king had said he would bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and all the matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in the realm. I don't know, we read quite a bit, but we need to get some context of what's happening with these 3. Well, I guess there's 4, counting Daniel. So the first thing we see is the king's failed attempt. We can learn a lot here about the tactics of the devil. He's using those today. Realize in this time frame, Israel, the other part of, it was divided kingdom, Judah and Israel. Israel had already fallen. So Jerusalem had come under the attack and was defeated by wicked King Nebuchadnezzar. During that time, he commanded Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, the man in charge of the palace, to select these Jewish boys and bring them back as captives. So out of Judah, these 4 men were selected, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. They were brought to Babylon with the intentions to force them to begin a new life. So each of them was surrounded by a heathen lifestyle and the practices of foreign strange land, but yet they remained faithful to God. For the next 3 years, the Babylonians attempted to change their beliefs by attacking these areas of their life. As we said earlier, the first area their attack was their name. I'm going to change your name to mean what we believe, not what you believe. The other areas they attacked, a couple of more, one of them was their education. And one of the ways to try to change a person is to, quote, reprogram the way they think and what they believe. This is just me. We can see that in our country. Education used to be about how to do math and science and reading and study and history and all this stuff. Not anymore. Now it's about reprogramming you for a new way of thinking. Chaldean education for these people. That was different than what the Hebrews were accustomed to. So through the educational process, Nebuchadnezzar was trying to gain control of these men, causing them to adapt to the heathen culture. Look who he wanted of the king sort, the upper level of the Hebrews. His thinking is, if I can change this group, the quote royalty of the Hebrews, into our way of thinking, then I won't be having a fight with them all the time. We can all assimilate them into what we're doing, and there won't be a conflict. So a brief study of the Chaldean language, with Aramaic, reveals it could possibly, these studies could have contained math, astronomy, history, alchemy. That's the study of metals to transform them into gold or silver, and probably included magical acts and things like that. So here we can see the fallacy and the danger of education alone, just for the sake of education. Had they succumbed to the pressures of their instructors, they would have fallen into that same trap. You can't mix good and evil and expect good results in the end. Look, I've been an educator. I'm in my 38th year teaching. I've been doing it a long time. I'm not knocking education like that. But what's the end goal? Where are we trying to hit? I can see the change in it just in the band world. The band world is not the same as it was. What used to be, you're trying to teach these children how to play instruments and be musicians, and now we're going all kind of different ways with stuff. A lot of things go on that should not. This is what we see from the Chaldeans. If we can get these Hebrew children, the leadership of this group, to believe like we do, well, guess what? That's what the devil's doing too. If I can get those people that go to church to believe what I believe, then they'll be like, and again, he knows he can't do anything against God. He knows, but he can hurt God through us, and he uses that tool of trying to educate us out of believing in God. I know we can see this. God works in his own ways. There's lots of things about the Lord that we don't understand. We're probably not going to ever understand. When we get to heaven for billions and hundreds and thousands of millions of years, we're going to learn something new about him every day. If the devil can get you to doubt one thing about him, you don't have to worry about it. You're not going to be there to hear about him after all the rest of that time. Second point that Chaldeans attacking here is their loyalty or their identification. As we said earlier, in Daniel's days, names were significant. Most all the time they had meaning. Sometimes I see kids' names, sometimes I'm wondering, where did they come up with these names? It looks like somebody threw a bunch of Scrabble pieces out on the ground and just picked up some letters and there's their name. I don't know how we arrive at all that. But back in the day, names meant something. They were tied to something. I mean, my last name's Wilkinson. It means son of Wilkins. I mean, that was the name. That's what that was about, where it came from. So Nebuchadnezzar knew that if he was going to conform these Hebrews to his culture, he had to do so by removing the old identity. New names would help them adapt to a new culture. The flip side of that, on the God side of it in religion. Why do you think you have a new name written down in glory? We're getting rid of the old one, we've taken on the new one. Well, that's what Nebuchadnezzar is trying to get rid of, that Hebrew identity, and make them into the Chaldean. The true reason for name change was to convert them from the true God to the false God. There's a lot of opinions varying about, you can read different commentaries as to the meaning of the Babylonian names. I just chose some to give you an example of comparison. You can read different commentaries. They're all kind of similar with little minor differences. But I want to bring out what the names mean to give you see how subtle the actual name change is, but there's a huge difference in meaning. So we go to Daniel, his old name, Daniel. That means God is my judge. They changed his name to Belshazzar, which means he whom Bel favors. Bel's a Babylonian god. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious. Shadrach means the command of Aku, who's a moon god. Mishael means who is what God is. Meshach meaning who is what Aku is. You see the subtle difference. They're substituting that one name for another here. Azariah means the Lord has helped. Abednego means servant of Nabu, God's wisdom. So we can see by attacking their names, they're attacking their identification, they're attacking their loyalty to God. Look, the devil's constantly attacking us with all kind of things. Look, he's changed the name. In my day, when you said it was a gay, happy day, that's what it meant, gay and happy. That ain't what it means no more. The devil's trying to change our vocabulary, our meaning for what things mean. I'll never forget in school, I passed out a piece of music called the Gay 90s. And it was actually in about 1990 something. That was the name of the piece. It was from 1890, by the way, and it was a portion of little folk tunes, little dancing, happy songs and all that. Them kids bust out laughing when they saw the name of that, but their mind's been changed. They didn't think what people in 1890 thought when they read that. That was happy songs and dancing songs, and that was a celebration. That's not what they were thinking. That'll bring us to the second thing. Third thing. He attacks their education, their loyalty, their identification. Then he attacks their lifestyle. Part of this you can see because he's trying to change their diet. Consider how great and plenteous food must have been in Babylonia, who controlled basically the then known world, versus the Jews who've been attacked for years here. Now they're finally in captivity. The king had the best food. So to dine under the instruction of the king meant they had plentiful portions of the very best of wine, meat, whatever was available. It's quite possible no expense was spared. Yet the 4 children purposed in their hearts not to defile themselves with the king's meat. After Daniel asked permission, they lived on pulse, which is basically vegetable mixture mashed up with beans and water. I got to tell you, I probably would have starved to death because vegetables that's not even on my list of things I'm going to eat on purpose, all right? So accidentally sometimes. Proverbs 23 kind of sums up what we're saying here, though. Proverbs 23:1. When thou sittest to eat with a ruler, consider diligently what is before thee. Put a knife to thy throat if thou be a man given to appetite. Be not desirous of his dainties, for they are deceitful meat. That's some good advice. Keep in mind, this is Proverbs. I'm sure that these 4 boys were familiar with this passage here. They probably heard that before. So with that choice, they completely committed the preservation of their lives to God. In all that they endured, God was with them. God blessed them. We're in our text, Daniel 1:17 says, as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. So we can clearly see in here, let me back up a second, we can clearly see the king's failed attempt. He's trying to attack their education. He's trying to attack their identification and loyalty. He's trying to attack their lifestyle. This was a failure because they said, we will not serve other gods. We won't serve thy gods. Again, we come to those same choices. The devil's constantly attacking us. We got to stand up and say, no, we're not doing that. I'm not serving you. I'm serving God, the one who created me, the one who gave his life for me. That's what they did. That's the second part of this. Without a complete understanding of the outcome, they boldly proclaimed that they would not serve or not worship the golden image that the king set up a few years later. It's in Daniel 3, verse 17. It says, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. You look at what they're saying and what they're doing here. We read stuff in the Bible sometimes and don't really realize what's going on. The kings basically tell them, you're going to bow or I'm going to kill you. I'm going to throw you in the fire. And they're like, well, you throw me in the fire if you want to, but I'm not serving your God. I'm serving my God because that's what he told me to do. If I got to die because he told, that's going to happen. God will take care of me. Have we reached the point where we really think like that? Do we go through our whole life, every day, all day, I'm not worried about what you can do to me. I serve God and he's going to take care of me. Listen, a lot of us would make different decisions during the day if that's what was first and foremost in our thought. I can't be the only one in here who's made some decisions that I'm like, I shouldn't have did that. And if I'd have been thinking God's going to deliver me, then I'm not worried what the boss says. I'm not worried about the guy in the dark alley says. I'm not worried about none of that. God is in control, not the circumstances. So their actions proved that they believed at least 2 of the 10 commandments, even though death may have resulted because of that choice. They knew God would be with them. They may not have known how he was going to do it, but they believed he was going to deliver them. That's one of the toughest things for most people to overcome. We want to know how, we want to know why, we want to understand. We don't have to know how. We don't have to know why. We don't have to understand. All we have to know is God said, you're mine and I'm going to take care of you. If that guides our decisions, you're always going to be on the right track. Again, by this time in this story, they'd been living in that country for several years. They had been exposed to the false religions of that land. Their education's been attacked. Their loyalty's been attacked. Their lifestyle's been attacked. But they're standing firm. You say we want to be one of these superheroes of the Bible, the David or all that stuff. Guess what? That's how you do it. Even under attack, you stay firm to God. You stay with God. God is in control. God is going to take care of it. Quit worrying about all that other stuff. What is the devil really able to do to you? What? He can send me straight into the presence of the Lord. And he can't even do that unless God tells him he can. All right? That's all that can happen. So realize they've made acquaintance with other people. They know the prince of the eunuchs is on a first name basis with Daniel. Daniel's got him not to let him eat the king's food. They've got some ends in that realm, but they didn't use the prince of the eunuchs. They stood firm on what God said. Third thing we can see is the believer's response to the king's command. One way or another, they knew deliverance was coming. But notice, it was not only the fire they were believing to be delivered from, but they were believing to be delivered from the king as well. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace and will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. They believed in deliverance from the king, from the fire, from all of it. This is a turning point here. They had done all they could. They had placed their lives into the Lord's hand, and faith had brought them to this place, and it was faith that would lead them on. The king's orders, they were spoken out in a heart full of fury. He got instantly furious. I don't know about you. I don't want to face the wrath of a king. But if God's told me to stand with him, that's what you got to do. They did. The king got so mad, he ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal, bound them up, cast them into the fire. This fire was so hot that the people that threw them into the fire were killed. This was the king's way of removing those men who stood opposed to his show of pride and vanity. So his commands were going to be adhered to. They heated the furnace. They did what he said, 7 times hotter, but they were not carried out. Yeah, they threw the men in there to burn and die, but they didn't burn and die. The unseen hand of God was at work on behalf of these captives. That'll bring us to our second point, is in the fire. The part of here. It's in Daniel 3, chapter 19. It says this, Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men, which were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and other garments, were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste and spoke unto his counselors. Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. And he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the 4th is like the Son of God. So we can see here a couple of things in this passage. Number 1, that phrase, Lo, I see 4 men loose. So the king's astonishment, which should have been certain execution, turned out to be just the opposite. Instead of watching the death of the faithful, he witnessed them walking with the Son of God. The cords were burnt. They were gone. They were bound when they threw them in there, but now they're walking around. They were free to walk with the Lord. With this freedom, they didn't choose to run out of the fire. They didn't choose to start screaming for help. They literally were just enjoying the presence of the Lord in a really unusual place, in the middle of a burning fiery furnace. Look, we can see that in a spiritual sense today. Look, our world's on fire. It's burning all over the place. These people are crazy. But we can enjoy the presence of the Lord right in the middle of all this chaos. That's where they found themselves. That's where we can find ourselves. Here's the problem. Most often, we miss a whole lot because our main goal is to just get out of trouble. Some people are going to miss heaven because their whole goal is just to miss hell. Super religious, go to church all the time, tithe everything, do it all, everything. They do everything perfect so they won't have to go to hell. But they had no relationship with Jesus Christ. They don't really even know who he is. They know a lot about him, and they're studying him all the time so that they don't go to hell, but they miss the point. That's not how you don't go to hell. The way to go to heaven is develop a relationship and a rapport with Jesus Christ, who came and died for you, and talk to him. There's where we miss a lot. We need to learn to stay where God's placed us and stay where God is. So when a person's with Jesus, everybody's going to know it. Again, I remember as a kid, that's it. When the first time I walked to an altar when I was 8 years old, 1973, July 8th. I still remember the day now. That day, I really just was listening to the preacher, and I'm like, I don't want to burn up in there. I'm going down to the front. I mean, that was my whole motivation. How many of y'all know that's not going to keep you for 60 years? It's going to take more than not wanting to go to hell. In Acts 4:13, this is what it said about the disciples. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled, and they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus. They're just like these four children in Babylonian captivity. They're walking around in the fire, in the chaos. Everybody noticed. All right. Again, the king's eyes became focused on the fourth man in the fire. We can't lose sight of that either. You got the three, they threw him in the fire. He sees them walking around, but his attention is on that fourth. Where did this guy come from? Who is that? Well, look, you're out here in this chaos of this world, living your life in the presence of the Lord. You're living happy. You're in God's presence constantly. People see that, and they want to know, well, why? How are you doing that? He's not so much caught on the fact that these three guys are still alive there. Who's that fourth guy? That we can bring attention to Christ by walking with him in the middle of all this chaos here. When we walk in obedience to God's word, our actions will cause to see Jesus in the same way that Nebuchadnezzar saw him in the middle of that fire. That'll bring us to the second part of this, in that fire. It's the company you keep. Much can be said about the consequences which result from those with whom a person chooses to fellowship, be it good or bad. You're always either leading or following. You're either impacting or being impacted. Everybody, every single one of us, from the president on down to the guy working at the grocery store trying to make his way through this life. Everybody. You're either following or leading, or you're following. One of the two. You're either impacting people for God's kingdom, or you're being impacted for this world. It's vital to surround yourself with those who are going to lead you in the right direction, give you wise counsel. As it is in this case, the faithful surrounded themselves with the faithful. The majority of our world strongly promotes self-preservation, yet that's not the case here. We can learn a lot from these four, count Daniel. The story is a good example of a truth that there's strength in numbers. It's our belief that this stand for these three was easier with all three than it would have been for just one. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah were determined to stay true to God even if it meant their death. Although separated from Daniel, their convictions remained the same as they were before. So compromise wasn't an option because they placed God first. Compromise causes a whole lot of trouble. And look, it don't take much. It's one little bitty bit. Look, Adam and Eve in the garden. One bite of one apple put all this and made all the mess we got today. That's what that blossomed into. It must be understood that their bonds of friendship were great, but their loyalty was always to God. God first. It's only when a person is in right relationship with God that the other relationships fall into their rightful place. That'll bring us to the last point we want to look at. The final one is after the fire. It's Daniel 3, verse 26. It says, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor was the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their house shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. I think that last phrase sums it all up. They captured all these people, brought them back to Babylonia, going to change them into good Babylonian citizens. And it ended up that the king changed all of the Babylonian citizens into good worshipers of God. Well, it didn't last long, but that was what the decree was. He said, Speak anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their houses made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. He set out to change them to his gods, and now he's changed Babylon by decree to their God. Under this we can see that blessed be the God. Miracles and mighty acts of God do cause men to stop, to look, to listen, to marvel. We talked about this in our quarter study on the miracles. They're going to see it. And these experiences may change them for a season. We see that in Nebuchadnezzar's life. But unless there's a transformation of heart, it won't be long before people who have been moved are going to return back to their old lifestyles. There's a lot of people who've been stirred, but have not been changed. So after the events of our text, the stirred king blessed the God of these Hebrews, passed his decree. And here is a good case to see that a person must get to know God, not just know about him. This is where a lot of people mess up. I think church fails people in this area too. Church is good about, here, you need to know the Lord. Here's the rules. They start with, here's the rules. They ought to start with, you need to know the Lord. Let me introduce you so you can talk to him. Let God tell them about the rules. Why we think we have to? Most of the time when we have rules, most of what we have is made up by us. It's not actually what God said anyway. We add a whole bunch of stuff to it. Go back to Adam and Eve. The devil asked her, he said, you're not supposed to eat of any of these trees? Oh no, he said, we can eat of all the trees except this one. And he said, but we're going to die. God didn't say you were going to die. Now you were, but he didn't say that. He just said, you don't eat of that tree. All right? We got to realize, again, with further study of the book of Daniel, it reveals that Nebuchadnezzar didn't even keep his own commandment very long. Again, he knew about God. He saw the miracle. He believed God did that. But he didn't bother to talk to God. He was trying to live off of the experience that he saw. It's not about what we saw. It's about who we know. It's not even about whether we follow the rules or not. I don't know how we can get this through our head. If you believe in God and you're gonna obey what he said and be obedient to what he said, then you're automatically following the rules. You don't have to try to follow the rules. Just do what God said. You think he's going to tell you something that's against the rules? If you're doing what he said, then it fits. God honored the stance of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and as a result, they were promoted in the province of Babylon. The three faithful trusted in God, and God used the events of their lives to impact or at least testify to this whole nation of his power. Second thing we can see about after the fire, the fact that it had no power over them. The natural elements of the fire, which under normal circumstances would have devoured and consumed them, was completely powerless against the faithful. The devil wants to devour and consume everybody, but it's completely useless against the faithful. As mighty men of God's court, princes, governors, captains, kings, counselors, they gathered around the Hebrews, and they saw their bodies weren't burned, no power was there. Their hair wasn't singed, their coats weren't changed, they didn't even smell like a fire. Look, I like to light a fire in the evening sometimes when it gets cool, which is like only 2 days out the whole year, but at least we get 2. But the next morning, I smell like smoke. They didn't smell like anything. Notice the 4 distinct characteristics concerning these men who moments before they were talking to him had walked out of a fire. These visible miracles preach a sermon in themselves. These men came to see what had happened. Look again at the 4 things. The fire had no power. There was not a hair on their head singed. Neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire passed on them. Again, we see here miracles are going to draw a crowd. But don't lose sight at the end of this. It drew a crowd. It got them promoted. They're heads of state in Babylon, if you will. And for a while, everybody's looking like they're following the Lord. But nobody's taken the opportunity to inquire further about the Lord that they saw in the fire. That's where most people in our world mess up today. They hear a fiery sermon. They get excited. They understand. I believe, Lord, I'm going to do it. But then they never actually look at that God that they just heard about. They just try to make it. Our conclusion. In the flesh, the choice to stay faithful to the Lord was probably the most difficult choice. One little bitty compromise would appear on the surface to have made life in Babylon a whole lot easier. They could have ate of the food of the king. In the natural, what would you want mashed up beans or you want lobster and steak? I mean, that's where their choice is. We've got to realize, though, that there is more to life than our time spent here on this earth. We associate life with being where we are now. Life's eternal. It's eternal for everybody too, by the way. The choice is where you're going to spend it, where you're going to spend that eternity. So the overriding question which should govern all our choices is, about anything, how is it going to affect my relationship with God? Or better yet, do I even have a relationship with God? Where is it going to lead me eternally? If I do this, what's going to be the end? What's the result of that 20,000 years from now? How will it impact others for the kingdom of God? This one, I think, is vitally important. Again, you're either leading or following. How is what I'm doing going to impact others for God's kingdom? If you believe in the Lord, then you know you're sent here to represent Him. Are you representing Him? Are you a good representation of Him? To experience the miraculous deliverance, faith has to work in the heart. You want to experience the deliverance, then develop the relationship. Quit concentrating on the circumstances you're looking at. Concentrate on what God said. We brought that up in almost every one of these lessons, the last 24. The people who did the great things for the Lord were more worried about what God said than what the world says. They're more interested in what God told me to do than getting killed by some leader somewhere because they don't like what I did. Who are you here to please? You're here to please the world? Then you're going to be with the world. If you're here to please the Lord, then you're going to be with Him throughout all of eternity. It's going to be interesting to see how much all this stuff we don't know, we're finally going to get the chance to know. And just think, I like to know. I get to figure things out and know forever, eventually. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you next week. We'll start our next quarter.